I was watching a movie from the 1960s, and it seems like back in the day, upper-class to middle-class men had clubs where they would attend to network, talk, play pool, and smoke. What happened to them? Why does it seem like younger generations of men are very isolated and do not have any male-only spaces? Story 1. They still exist but tend to be reserved for the upper class. Middle and lower class men participate in more affordable activities that are often just distractions. Not all, though. I find that networking spots have also become more specialized and niche, like specific events for particular fields and types of people. Story 2. Gentlemen's clubs originated in the United Kingdom, where 3 of the oldest gentlemen's clubs are still in operation. They are Brooks's, established 1764, Boodle's, established 1762, and White's, established 1693. Out of interest, I have read a few books on the history of gentlemen's clubs in the United Kingdom and their function and purpose in Victorian England. Predominantly, these clubs offered an opportunity for patrons to gamble and spend time in London away from their town or village estates in relative seclusion and without mingling with common folk. The primary means of income for this type of gentleman was revenue derived from land ownership, international trade, plundering colonies, and related activities. These clubs offered privacy, security, and an open atmosphere for like-minded wealthy individuals to partake in gambling and other traditional men's pastimes. The wagers made at these clubs often made newspaper stories. Once it was said a man collapsed at the doorstep of White's club, and immediately the members of the club made a bet on whether the man was dead or not. Soon aristocracy and the politically affluent began to become members, and the clubs moved from places of relaxation into bastions of power where key decisions regarding war, country, economics, and commerce were made. In the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries, the clubs that you were a member of often defined your progress and status in society. Preventing someone from becoming a member of a club was called being blackballed. Becoming blackballed by existing members of the club meant you were unclubbable, and that significantly restricted your social and often economic progress. Club membership for a certain class of society in this period was an uncompromising requirement. For example, the Brooks's Club mentioned above was created by individuals who were blackballed for membership at White's. In other words, anybody who was somebody had to be part of a club, even going so far as creating a new one if no one else would have you. These clubs also established and expected an unwavering set of clubland behaviors. For example, tipping an employee of the club was seen as an extremely undesirable action. The rationale was that one would not tip a member of their own household staff, and the club was seen as an extension of a member's home. Privacy was held to the very highest standard. For example, if one called a club looking for a member or patron, no whereabouts would be disclosed to the person looking. There was a story that I recollect from one of the books. The wife of a member called the club to inquire if her husband was there, to which the person answering the call replied, "No, ma'am, your husband is not here." The wife then asked, "But you never asked my name. How would you know whose husband I was talking about?" For which the response in true British wit was, "Nobody's husband is ever here, ma'am." With the fall of the landed gentry in the middle of 19th and 20th century England, and a fall in fortunes, these clubs began to shut down due to a lack of patrons and declining membership dues. However, there still exist other relatively ancient clubs that do not specifically cater to gambling but bring together members of a specific interest or affiliate group, such as the Royal Automobile Club and the Oxford and Cambridge Club, which are now open to both sexes. Recently, judges, barristers, and legal professionals who were members of a gentlemen-only club called Garrick's, established 1831, came under fire for affiliating with a club that excluded women. Story 3. The concept basically splits into A. Country clubs, Freemasons, Elks, Friars, golf clubs, veterans of foreign wars outposts, fraternal orders of police, and B. A sanitized name for strip clubs, which I assume this headline was originally about, or pubs or bars. Younger generations of guys don't tend to be rich. Baby boomers could afford a house and 2 cars and a wife and kids with only a high school education, which generally leaves bars and sports bars and pubs and strip clubs or gyms for men who aren't rich, but rich men can afford country clubs and strip clubs. Story 4. Membership fees, for example, of the more exclusive London clubs such as White's, Boodle's, the Travellers, and others, are around £5,000 a year before you've had a cup of tea. Most people can't afford that for the occasional visit. If you can afford it, you have to be seconded or recommended by a standing member, and then, depending on policy, there may be an interview or vote. The alternative is to join a less exclusive club that has reciprocal arrangements, meaning it gives members access as visitors to other clubs. However, these tend to be geographically distant to avoid oversubscription and abuse. Story 5. That's the most common name for strip clubs where I am from, maybe due to being sued for discrimination, like what happened to the Boy Scouts in 1997. Story 6. When I moved to Austin back in 2010, I thought it was a good time to upgrade my circle. One plan was to hang out at this upscale cigar lounge that was pretty much adjacent to the Capitol. Maybe if I socialized and made some connections, I could get a foot in the door for better opportunities. $5,000 sign-up fee, then $300 per month dues, plus $150 per month humidor locker. But complimentary drinks, top shelf, and a 20% discount from retail on all cigars. Turns out you need deep pockets to join the local gentlemen's club. I subcontracted with Facebook for 4 years instead. Story 7. They still very much exist. I have been to a few through work. The clientele are generally high net worth, high-earning individuals. Most of us commoners don't get to rub shoulders with those folks, so it passes us all by. Nothing to rave about if I'm honest, but they serve as a very easy platform to do business between said individuals. Story 8. They still exist, but you and I are too poor to get in. Men's clubs are where it's at these days. Secret societies where you can only become a member by invitation is quite popular. Story 9. I am a member of the Fraternal Order of Eagles. I try to encourage others to join it or groups like it all the time. If you are in the United States, I assure you there is one or one like it near you. Story 10. The same dudes kept going, so they turned into an old guy thing. Want to get any younger guy out of a room real fast? Fill it with old men reminiscing about days before they were born and talking poorly about anyone under 40. Story 11. In cities like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, there used to be upwards of 10 to 20 gentlemen's clubs that were for upper-class men. Nowadays, there are only a handful. For example, in Boston, only 2 are left. All the others have either closed or have converted to male-female clubs. For example, the Algonquin in Boston went co-ed many years ago, and the Tavern Club went co-ed a few years ago. In the remaining clubs, it is common for there to be left-wing members pushing to allow women. I was in a men's club, and several men resigned from the club when it voted to remain all-male. Also, there were cases when the members wanted to invite a man who, from a social standpoint, should have been in the club, and he refused, saying, "I can't be in an all-male club for political reasons." In other words, since he was in a prominent position, he would have been attacked and possibly forced to resign his professional position if he joined the club. The reasons there are few such clubs left include the following. 1. Feminism and the increasing social power of women. 2. Smaller numbers of wealthy men of leisure. And 3. The increasing availability and quality of private entertainment such as television and video games. Story 12. London still has quite a few of them, but the sorts of guys that go there are normally very rich. Not just anyone can walk in off the street either. You have to already know someone there. Story 13. One of the factors is that many of the older men in these clubs did not want to bring in new or younger people, and as a result, they caused their club to fail. They formed a club, then did not recruit new members, and the club fell apart when people left or died. Story 14. The United States Supreme Court ruled that these clubs had to allow women because networking and other activities affecting people's careers took place at these clubs. By not allowing women, they were effectively preventing women from business opportunities. Story 15. I work with 95% men all day. Golf is 95% men. Bars and pool halls are 80% men, and even more male the more it feels like a pool hall. Shooting is 95% men. Do I really need to find another place to go, to only be around men? At the end of all that, for the love of God, I want to either be alone or go where the women are at. Story 16. Is it worth mentioning that the working classes in the United Kingdom also had such things and many still exist in some form? Working men's clubs were common. a place to go after work for smoke, a pint, and a chat with other like-minded souls. Granted, they may have lacked the refinement of gentlemen's clubs, but the function was similar. Many a union action will have been worked out in one of these. Story 17. They still exist. They are just absurdly expensive. I was invited to join one as a social member, which means no voting power for club affairs and a 5-year probationary period without the ability to bring guests. After giving a lecture on men's mental health, the fees were around $20,000 per year. Full membership costs closer to $40,000 per year. They are simply not worth the price unless you work in a very senior position in a large company within a big money industry. Story 18. To be honest, there's more to do now, so there seems to be way less participation in any kind of club or activity. There's an ungodly amount of content on television, streaming services, video games, and the internet that didn't exist back then. There was much less entertainment to do at home back then, so people went out and did things to pass the time. There's also the fact that fathers now, compared to the 1960s, are generally doing way more parenting and spending more time with the kids in general. That was seen as women's work back then. Last but not least, divorce being acceptable now likely contributes. Some men probably stayed away because they hated their wife, maybe kids too, and home life, but it wasn't socially acceptable to get a divorce then. So they stayed away as much as possible. Not fair to women really, but I'm sure it happened. Story 19. Just go to good cigar lounges. The ratio of men to women is about 97-3. People behave even if they don't outside, and in general, it is a swell group of people. Or at least that has been my experience. Story 20. I actually had a similar thought yesterday, and through Wikipedia, I discovered that they do still exist but are all still very exclusive with high membership fees and standards that would bar most ordinary people from joining. Apparently, they are still a big thing in Commonwealth countries. Wikipedia mentioned India and Pakistan, for example. There also still exist gentlemen's clubs in the United States. My digging also led me to discover one in London called Reform Club, not connected to the current Reform Party. That dates back to the 1860s, where a group was created to counter the party known as the Whigs and bring about social and economic reforms to the United Kingdom. They are also the gentlemen's club from the book, Around the World in 80 Days. Apparently, they do hold visits and tours, but they only accept groups of up to 10 people at a time, and then it's an entry fee of £15 per person, with the tour group being expected to dress appropriately. So, they do still exist but have died down in popularity, and because by nature they tend to be very selective over who can and cannot join, with prospective members having to be vouched for and then standing in front of a committee board, this means that they are not easily accessible for the everyday person, and the goings-on are still private, just as they would rather it be due to the original purpose of these clubs being a home away from home. Story 21. I actually had a similar thought yesterday, and through Wikipedia, I discovered that they do still exist but are all still very exclusive, with high membership fees and standards that would bar most ordinary people from joining. Apparently, they are still a big thing in Commonwealth countries. Wikipedia mentioned India and Pakistan, for example. There also still exist gentlemen's clubs in the United States. My digging also led me to discover one in London called the Reform Club, not connected to the current Reform Party. That dates back to 1860-something, where a group was created to counter the party known as the Whigs and bring about social and economic reforms to the UK. They are also the gentlemen's club from the book, Around the World in 80 Days. Apparently, they do hold visits and tours, but they only accept groups of up to 10 people at a time, and then there's an entry fee of £15 per person, with the tour group being expected to dress appropriately. So, they do still exist but have died down in popularity, and because by nature they tend to be very selective over who can and cannot join, with prospective members having to be vouched for and then standing in front of a committee board, this means that they are not easily accessible for the everyday person, and the goings-on are still private, just as they would rather it be due to the original purpose of these clubs being a home away from home. Story 22. They exist. I am a member of one in my city. It is an excellent place, though it is decently expensive to be a member, but I have always felt it is worth it. The problem is that there are 50 members in total. There is me, one man in his early 30s, one in his late 30s, and then everyone else is 50 and older. Story 23. They are called cigar lounges, and I miss them heaps. Yes, I have the money to be part of that scene. I loved the jazz music and cognac. Now it is all trash and no class or style. Story 24. You need references from 2 active members to allow entry to events, at which point you're a trial member, and if you don't irritate anyone for a few of those, you'll gain membership. And they have at least 1 event every day of the year. I will not elaborate, so long, friend. Story 25. They still exist. Here's a guide to London's flashiest gentlemen's clubs. They'll cost you a few £1,000s a year to join, and you usually have to be recommended by 2 current members. Often, there are other requirements that you have to meet before joining, depending on the club.